Well, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. I still see a large number of people streaming in, but I think we'll get started. I'm Tom Schreier, and I have the privilege, for those of you that I don't know, of leading the Inspired Leadership Initiative here at Notre Dame. It's our program for those who have completed their chosen career and look to return to campus for an academic year to discover, discern, and ultimately design their next act. I want to sincerely thank you for participating in the second installment of the Inspiring Conversations series, where we will spend this semester discussing leading people in an ever-changing world. We're excited and humbled by the amount of interest in this program, as we have over 720 participants ranging from ILI fellows to Notre Dame alumni to faculty, students, and friends registered to join us over the fall semester. We're also excited to share that our community has 21 countries from around the world represented in the community. We've designed today's conversation to have as much engagement as possible, facilitated by having an interactive question and answer session later. We hope that you'll find your experience as part of our community to be both engaging and inspiring. And we're looking forward to getting to know you better over the course of the next few weeks. Before we start, I also want to thank all of those who put in so much time and lent their talents to bring this program to life from its original conception. I'd like to particularly thank the Alumni Association for all the thought and work that they have put into ThinkMD. Now, just a couple of quick technical items. You're all muted by the host to facilitate a smooth program without background noise. Later in the program, we will have a question and answer session. This will be facilitated by you submitting questions for Dave through the Google form, which is being shared with you now. Later, if Dave wants to engage directly with you on the question, we will facilitate that opportunity. That Q&A form should show up on the chat button on your Zoom screen. Also, we recommend that you use the speaker view in Zoom, as that will highlight our speakers as they come on screen. This week, I'm delighted that we have the opportunity to discuss Sustainably Nourishing a Challenged, Changing, and Hungry World with my friend Dave MacLennan, who is the Chairman and CEO of Cargill. Together, we will explore how to ensure that Cargill can meet the mission of nourishing the world in a safe, responsible, and sustainable way. As many of you saw in the preview video on ThinkMD, Dave has been CEO of Cargill since 2013, and he's a passionate, purpose-driven leader who takes the mission of Cargill to heart. He is also passionate about the needs of underprivileged youth and how they can access education, a passion which has led to nonprofit board roles at Youth Frontiers and College Possible. A hearty welcome to you, Dave.
Thanks, Tom. Great to be with you. Appreciate the invitation.
Yeah, well, it's really wonderful to see you here on screen. So let's start, Dave, with a side I know well of you, which is your human side. How do you make decisions with the scale of enterprise you operate in? And, how does that affect your leadership style?
It's I get asked that question from time to time because Cargill is a big company. We've got 160,000 people. We're doing business in over 70 countries in the world and selling into 125 countries. Cargill never sleeps. We're in all time zones all over the globe. And so if I think long and hard enough about it, I can become very overwhelmed. But so it's not that I don't think long and hard enough about it, but it really, you have to decide, what are the decisions that only the CEO can make? What are the meetings or the conversations that are unique to me, and everything else you have to be prepared to leverage your team, to leverage your leadership, and to let some things go. And it's just simply impossible. The sheer volume of what's happening in a company like ours around the world, it's impossible for me to get involved in the decisions. And you also have to, when you become a CEO of a big company, you have to understand, where can I make the impact? As I said, thinking of my own position as CEO, where can I make a difference? Where can I move the needle? And oftentimes they're very much at the top of the house: culture, strategy, talent, setting priorities. So my leadership style is one where I have very, very high levels of trust and transparency with my direct reports. and create a culture of that transparency and honesty so that we can talk about anything and that they feel empowered. They know that they have my support, that I have their back when they make big decisions. And I think it also says you've got to be thoughtful about, not second guessing those decisions. Certainly if they're ones that you wouldn't have made, you can have a constructive conversation, but it really requires significant levels of trust and transparency.
So Dave, maybe let's just spend a second talking about that. How long, you've been in the position since 2013, how long do you think it takes to get the right talent in place to have that level of trust and transparency? And how long does it take to have an effect on the culture of an organization as far-reaching and far-ranging and as global as Cargill is?
That's a really important question. And I was just talking to somebody today who manages one of our businesses that has been struggling. And I said to him, do you feel good about the decisions that you've made in making to get the business turned around? And he said, yeah, I just wish I had made them sooner. And I said, I think that's a very common refrain, not common, but say typical, frequent refrain. I read a lot of books on leadership, and one of the very typical refrains from CEOs in particular is they look back on their career and think, I wish I had done that sooner. And I think it's easy to say that with the benefit of hindsight, of course. But I think the fact is you've got to move with speed. You've got to move with agility, but you've also got to have the right balance of how long do you wait before you make a decision versus following your intuition. And I think oftentimes that when you're in a position of leadership, you've gotten there because you've got into good intuition and you listen to your inner voice. When I came into the job in 2013, my initial approach was, I want to get a firsthand assessment of the team that I inherited. I was chief operating officer for 2 years, but I hadn't chosen the members of the executive team at the time. I didn't want to come in guns blazing and say, you're gone, you're in. And everything looks different. Once you get to the CEO role, it all changes. And no matter how much you prepare yourself, until you are in the job, behind the desk, feet on the ground, you don't know what it's going to be like. And so I made a decision that I would spend the first 6 months to a year doing an assessment of that leadership team. And so I had some strong clarity in the first 6 to 8 months and greater clarity after about the first year. But it was about a year and a half before I put in, I'll call it my own leadership team. 3 members of the leadership team that I inherited left the company. And I will now fall victim to my own cliche, which is, I wish I had done it sooner. I wish I had moved faster, but that's easy to say with the benefit of hindsight. But in my heart, I knew what I wanted to do, but I wish I had moved a little faster.
So there's a particular challenge today, Dave, and it's the pandemic, right? And the lack of ability to go to different locations. How has that affected your leadership and the culture? And I'm sure there's business challenges too that have resulted from this global phenomenon none of us anticipated.
Yeah, I'll start with your question, Tom, about leadership and culture. I mean, it is very hard to lead by Zoom or Teams or whatever, Skype. It's just, there's no substitute for human interaction and face-to-face contact, none. And I don't care how much people think I'm just as productive online. I don't believe you are. It's my own philosophy of leadership. And so that's been tough. The biggest impact is that face-to-face interaction, but also which comes from, being in an office building. Our headquarters here in Minneapolis are here in Minneapolis, and in the building I'm in, we've got on a busy day 2,000 people, with another campus about 5 miles down the road, which has another 1,000. And so on any given day, whether it's walking through the lunchroom or sitting down at somebody's table to interact with them or just saying hello, that's all gone. I mean, it's a ghost town. There's nobody here. The other impact is travel. One of the highlights, the most enjoyable parts of my job is I get to travel the world. And I, on average, or typically, maybe not on average, I was out of the country once a month. That's probably been a benefit. it was an unsustainable pace. Now that I look back on it, to be in Asia 3 times over 4 months. And, I think I meet a lot of CEOs that kind of brag as a badge of honor, and it's exhausting. So I don't miss the jet lag. I don't miss the disruption that comes to your sleep patterns, your eating, your exercise. But I do miss being able to go into our plants, our facilities, to meet face to face with customers, government officials, NGOs, counterparties. I did a Zoom call. Actually, it wasn't a Zoom call. It was with the mayor of Shanghai, and so we did. It was on a Chinese app that they used, and so I wore my suit coat. I had a tie. It was at 8 o'clock on a July evening, a very hot July evening. So I wore shorts, and I thought, if he asked me if I have to stand up to show respect, I'm in trouble here. But so we had our call, and it was fine. But as those of you that have done business in China before know, there's a lot of ceremony. There's a lot of, whether it's exchanging business cards or drinking tea or exchanging pleasantries. It goes a long way, and that is all gone. And so I think that's something that I really miss, and something that I'm hopeful will return. I am very concerned about the impact on our culture and on the world's companies' culture, I should say, perhaps the Western world, because many Eastern companies, I'll name China, it's business as usual. Our Chinese colleagues, they're not wearing masks into the office. They're not wearing masks on the street. There's temperature testing, but they got after it, and their life is normal. But I think with each month that passes, the strain on people's lives, the ability to maintain the personal connections amongst coworkers, the stress on people's emotional health, especially for those with children at home, becomes more and more intense. We have an executive coach that our team uses, who's also a psychologist and a consultant to many companies and boards. And months ago, he said, the second pandemic is going to be the mental health crisis that's going to come as a result of COVID. He and I were just talking before this call, and it's becoming clear this is not going anywhere anytime soon. Nobody on our team is holding out any hope that there's going to be a silver bullet vaccine that's going to make it go away, and that we're entering the cold months in the Northern Hemisphere. I'm very concerned. And so we are working hard on communicating, on providing support to our colleagues around the world, to offering them whatever help they need, to suggesting that if you need to come in the office just to get away from home, to provide a break from homeschooling your kids, we can make that happen as long as we're within guidelines of the local offices. So it's a huge impact for which I have a lot of concern.
So maybe a little on the business side of the COVID pandemic, Dave. You're a company that has a global supply chain. There's been disruptions in all kinds of different parts of the chain, I'd imagine. Maybe just a little bit on what that's meant for you and for Cargill from a business perspective.
Well, it's very different today than it was in the early days, Tom. I mean, in the early days, March, April, May, when everyone was trying to figure out new ways of working and what does this mean, the biggest impact was on our protein business. So we manufacture beef, poultry around the world, and particularly in the United States. We're a large manufacturer of ground beef and beef. Those are plants where there's a lot of people and they're in close conditions. And we moved very, very quickly to put in all safety measures possible, and everything from temperature screening to COVID testing, to distancing, to slowing down the speed of the plants to make sure that we could have proper distancing, to staggering shifts so that one shift that was leaving the plant was not coming into contact with the shift that was coming into the plant, to rapid isolation of people that tested positive. We were fortunate. We only had to close down back in March, April, May, 3 of our plants, and they were always in consultation with local governments. And we exercised and we implemented in incredible and intense cleaning practices to make sure everyone was safe. We're a values-based company, as you alluded to, and our declared values of put people first, do the right thing, and reach higher. Putting people first made our decisions about when to close, what protocols to implement. We were consulting with the CDC, with local state and health authorities. We had Homeland Security tour our plants because we were a role model for other companies and for state health agencies to see, here's what Cargill did. Here's the steps that they took to keep their employees safe. So the early days were very daunting, but again, we used putting people first and doing the right thing as our filter for, it was very easy to make decisions, as I said, and people always came ahead of operations and profits and putting them safe. So it's become more of a way of life now, as you know, that we've adjusted to it. We figured out ways to throughout all of our industries to keep people safe. But, you know, there certainly are hotspots around the world. The thing that I think we were most struck by is we were able to get all of our office workers remote very, very quickly. And we were concerned whether our technology systems would be able to sustain that. And I don't think Cargill is unique in that way, but I think the world business structure has been generally impressed with the ability of everyone to use technology effectively and for technology to be able to support everyone going at home, you know, with immediate notice back in March.
So another value, Dave, of Cargill is sustainability. And I know it's something that near and dear to your heart. So talk a little bit about Cargill's efforts as it relates to sustainability, which is right in the mission of the organization.
Well, as you said, our statement of purpose is to nourish the world in a safe, responsible, and sustainable way. And so we are incredibly focused on creating sustainable supply chains around the world. We have set ambitious and achievable goals. We've set targets to be able to, that are measurable as well, to say, how do we know that we're using less water, less land, reducing our greenhouse gas emissions? We are practicing radical transparency, to use a phrase that gets used very often, in terms of working with NGOs, working with others to say, hold us accountable for what we're doing and for making our supply chains more sustainable. We have a working group of various constituents, various stakeholders, as I said, NGOs, farmer groups, and we meet on a regular basis. We post all of our minutes, all of our notes and commitments onto our website. People are going to buy from companies that they trust, and companies that are sustainable, and companies that are transparent. And we are working on all of those components because our ingredients are in many of the world's products. We were one of the first companies to sign on to the soy moratorium in Brazil in 2006. We have worked actively in our cocoa supply chains and in our palm supply chains in Indonesia and West Africa for cocoa to reduce environmental usage and reduce natural resource usage. And as I said, in terms of setting measurable and transparent goals, we've set in our supply chains very specific targets to say, here's what we want to do to reduce our environmental impact in terms of being a commodity company in order to, again, hold ourselves accountable and make that transparent to our customers.
So Dave, one thing you mentioned in there, which I think makes Cargill unique, is unlike a lot of other large companies that their brand is all over the place, a lot of what you do and a lot of what you produce kind of sits behind other brands. Maybe just talk for a second about, just that component of the business and, what that means for you and for Cargill.
Yeah, we're not a CPG, consumer products goods company. We're not a consumer packaged goods company. We do own some brands. So for example, we have a natural 0-calorie sweetener that's made from stevia called Truvia. And you might see it in coffee shops or in restaurants. I think we're the #2 tabletop brand by market share. Some of, beef, for example, you typically don't buy beef by the brand, but we do have some brands called Excel, which is one of our brands. Sterling Silver is another. Turkey, so honeysuckle white, that is our product. So we produce that here in the United States. But as you said, Tom, most of our products are either ingredients. So it might be soybean meal to feed poultry. It might be cocoa and chocolate that we would sell to Hershey's or Mars or Nestle. It might be cooking oil. Or it might be also in the front end of the supply chain where we are transporting, our customers are farmers around the world. So we'll buy their soybeans, wheat, corn. We'll put it in a barge, a boat, a truck, move it by river, by ocean around the world to where it is going to be consumed or processed into other products. Most of our beef products in the U.S. are consumed here, but we also do export. And we make chicken in China, for example, but again, not branded names. In Central America, we have some brands. So there's an adage that at any point in time, you probably consumed in a given day something that Cargill produced or manufactured or transported somewhere, but you're not going to see our name on a label. We're a business-to-business company primarily, even though we do have some branded products, as I mentioned. The eggs in your Egg McMuffin, we make those. And again, you're not going to see the Cargill logo on that. But so our products are ingredients and products that our customers use and that you consume as individuals.
So another question, maybe just tapping into the global nature that you've been referring to, Dave, is how much of your role ends up being, involved and engaged in various, kind of international topics and questions, right? Some of which, in the world we live in today are probably as or more divisive than ever. And so I have to imagine that's a part of what you do and what you engage in.
I mean, my job and the job of any Cargill leader in any given day is a lesson in macroeconomics and microeconomics for that matter, but also in geopolitics. As I mentioned, we're located in over 70 countries. We do business in 125. We sell products in 125. And so you've got to be very aware of the political situation, of the social dynamics, of the interaction between the two, which to your point, are more sensitive today than they ever have been. Certainly, I think in the recent past, certainly in my tenure as CEO, and I think certainly in the last, in recent history. One of the things that I've spent a lot of time on in the past few years and more recently is the U.S.-China trade relationship. It is the most vital trading relationship on the planet. And it's not just an economic relationship, but also the social and cultural, academic, innovation relationship that our two countries enjoy. These are the two biggest economies on the planet, two of the three most populous nations in the world. And our belief is that for the world to be fed in a safe, sustainable way, it has to be done with the cooperation and trust between the U.S. and China. And as everybody knows, the relationship is very strained right now for a lot of different reasons. So I would say, as I think, as I look back on what surprised me coming into the job, or maybe it wasn't a surprise, it was what did I not expect? And what I didn't expect or wasn't clearly cognizant of before, as I said, you don't really know the job until you get into it. The role that working with politicians, with diplomats, with societal and political leaders plays in a multinational company like ours, but particularly where a company like ours, where we're making food, and food should not be a subject of trade disputes. It should get to where it's needed. It should get to where people are hungry and need nutrition. And when you start using food as a weapon, the world becomes a much more fraught and tenuous place. And so I have spent a lot of time on that in my time as CEO.
So you said there were a couple things that you didn't expect as CEO. One thing I think that our audience may not expect is that food is an area where innovation actually plays a meaningful part. And maybe just give a couple examples of your thoughts around the role of innovation in the food supply.
I think one of the most interesting innovations that is very much becoming more in the public mindset is alternative proteins. And as I mentioned, we make poultry and beef. We used to be in the pork business. We feed about a third of the world's salmon around the world. So we're involved in aquaculture and feeding livestock and poultry and fish around the world. But what you're seeing with companies like Impossible Foods and Beyond Meat is the advent of plant-based protein and alternatives to animal-based protein. We're very involved with that. So we have a pea protein joint venture called Purus. And so we are making pea protein, which is an ingredient for some of the alternative proteins that you can see in the marketplace. We have our own alternative plant protein patties and ingredients that are in retail stores. Again, you won't see the Cargill name on it. But that clearly is a consumer trend. People want choice, and they want transparency. They want to know what's in my food. We have non-GMO soybean oil, for example, that we will sell to our customers for use in mayonnaise or as cooking oil. There is a set of consumers that don't want to consume GMO products, or they don't want to consume animal protein that has been fed by GMO products. So we have those kind of supply chains. I think also agriculture and food have been relatively slow to adopt technology, but it is the pace of adoption in the ag and food and nutrition industries is accelerating rapidly. And I think the pandemic also has forced companies to find new ways of making the food, and it's caused consumers, I think, to think more about what they eat. And certainly our retail customers are doing really well. As you all know, I'll bet you all have eaten more meals at home in the last 6 months than you probably have in the prior 6 years. It's not been good for our food service customers, restaurants, small family-owned restaurants, as well as large chain restaurants. That has not been as good for their business, but certainly the retailers and the companies that make the products that are then put into the retail shelves have done very well. So it's caused us all in our industry to find new ways to make the food, but also new ingredients that consumers are going to increasingly want. And it's also been very interesting to see that in a time of crisis like the one that we're in, a lot of consumers have gone back to trusted, reliable brands. Companies, that are our customers that maybe we grew up with as baby boomers or Generation Xers that fell out of favor, but all of a sudden, the stores are stocked with things like soups and meals that you can prepare at home, and that's been a big difference. The other thing, Tom, is artificial intelligence as far as our animal nutrition and health business goes. Is being able to monitor the nutrition and health of livestock and poultry to see, what are they eating, what are they consuming, are they healthy, and to make sure that the protein that ultimately gets to the shelves of the consumers is being fed properly with the proper, mixes of nutrition and vitamins and minerals that make for a healthy product. We've got a joint venture with a company called Canthus, which can do facial recognition for cows. And it can see, when are they feeding? How much are they eating? Are they putting on weight properly? Are they properly hydrated? Are they drinking? Are they moving? And so using AI for animal nutrition and health is also a tool that I think has been a really interesting innovation in the world of ag and food.
Well, who'd have thunk that we live in a world where there's facial recognition for our bovine friends, right?
It was a little bit embarrassing because we had a camera at a cow barn, and my name came up on one of the cows. So how that happened, but.
Just so you're now walking through some other place with facial recognition, and they don't put a cow's name.
Exactly.
All right. Well, we have a large number of really good questions here from our audience here, Dave. So we'll try to get to as many of them as we can. Is there anything before that I didn't touch on that you think would be helpful for our audience to hear?
No, I think the key questions of worker safety in a time of pandemic, of maintaining culture and maintaining emotional and psychological mental health is going to be a real challenge as we go into the northern hemisphere's winter, when people are going to be more housebound, figuring out ways to survive and balance their work and home life. I think, as I said, that's something that we're really focused on. Sustainability, nourishing the world in a safe, responsible, and sustainable way is, I think, going to be and will continue to be one of the presenting issues for ag and food companies, but not just ag and food. It's oil and gas. It's all consumers of the world are thinking more and spending more time on sustainability and how to be more balanced in terms of how the world's resources are being used. So those, I think we've hit on some of the key themes, Tom, but I'm happy to take questions and look forward to it and talk more about the world of ag, food, and nutrition. It's a fascinating business. As I said, we get to put food, we have the privilege of putting food on people's table every day, and it's a privilege we take very, very seriously.
So Dave, the format here for the Q&A is I'm going to give the name of the individual or individuals, because some of the questions cover consistent themes. I'll read the questions, and then if you want to follow up with that individual, or if it's not clear, let us know and we'll unmute that individual, and then you can engage directly with them, okay?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so the first questions, right, one comes from Pat O'Hara, who's at Notre Dame, and another from John Gallagher, who's in New York. They both get to the kind of family-owned private nature of Cargill and some of the challenges that come with that potentially. I mean, you are a huge global company with 115 roughly billion in revenue. And it's unusual that a company of that scale has maintained a private nature. So maybe just a little bit on, what have you done to maintain the status as a privately held company? What's the board's philosophy in that regard? And with all these family stakeholders, how do you keep them both informed and involved in the decision-making process?
Well, there's a lot there, and it's also a big part of my job. I think in terms of governance and shareholder relations, I have the gift of leading a privately owned company. And then when I think about my colleagues in publicly owned companies that have, takeover offers, hostile shareholders, all the SEC requirements that go along with being public, that's an incredible challenge. So I have the gift of working for a private company. That being said, we do manage and govern our company as much like a public company as possible. So our board of directors, we have 6 family directors representing the Cargill and MacLennan families. We have 6 independent directors, all of whom are current or former CEOs, and typically of large public or private companies. And so it's a great dynamic of the blend of family company representatives, family owner representatives, I should say, and public company directors, and finding that right balance between public and private ownership is the dynamic tension of the boardroom. We are very well owned, and by that I mean we've been in business for 155 years. If you've done any reading about private family companies, they typically last 2 generations. Our board family directors represent the 5th and 6th generation, and there are 7th generation family members who are who are very young, but we have 7 generations of Cargill and MacLennans in the company, or I should say in existence. They are committed to private ownership. They are so proud of their company, of the legacy that their relatives have left them. And this is their wealth creation vehicle. This is where they want to keep their money. The vast majority of the profits they keep in the company, and we pay them a dividend based on a formula. But the fact is, they're saying, we want you to continue to invest money in the company, take the earnings and invest them back into growth, back into feeding the world. And so we're very fortunate in that way. But we also have regular communication with our shareholders. We have quarterly meetings to give them an update. We have 2 biannual, I guess that's redundant. We have 2 meetings each year in the summer and winter to have interaction with management so they know who our talent is. We work hard at keeping in good communication with them, certainly very different than what a public company does. But we consider ourselves as management to be very fortunate to be privately owned and have owners that take the long-term view. Sometimes I get the question, when are you going to go public? I don't see that in the near future. As I said, the family owners are very committed to private ownership, but we have a good mix in the boardroom in terms of, following as many of the principles of Sarbanes-Oxley as we can possibly follow.
Good. So another question from somebody who must know you, a Tunangara from here in Minnesota, and it gets to families well. And he asks, what are the enduring values and lessons from your father who worked at Cargill that you continue to instill throughout your tenure as the CEO of Cargill?
Yeah, my dad worked for Cargill he had two employers. One was the U.S. government when he was in the Army, and two was Cargill. What I remember most as a kid growing up was his intense pride in the company, his loyalty and dedication to the people, the respect for the people that he worked with, and the pride in which he did his job, and that anybody who I met who worked for Cargill of our mission of making food and putting nutrition on the tables of the world is really an inspiring and awesome responsibility. And so, I learned from him the strength of a culture. And over 155 years, our culture has changed and will continue to change, and it should change. But I think the strength of the culture and pride in the organization is really the things that I learned most significantly from him.
Yeah, just from having the privilege of knowing you, Dave, I can see that sense of purpose, right? It comes out, you exude it, right, as it relates to the organization. Another question here comes from Kate Schaefer. She actually runs a similar program to our Notre Dame program at the University of Minnesota. And her question is, rural communities are struggling with many challenges, including food insecurity. What role does a corporation, or what role can a corporation like Cargill play in helping our communities to thrive, especially our rural and farming communities?
Kate's exactly right. Especially the American farm community is struggling. It's been a sustained period of low prices. There's been year after year of record or bumper crops. There's a current system of subsidies in place to make up for the loss of market share due to the trade war with China, particularly for soybeans. And so, in terms of, it sends a false signal to the market. And so it's maintained, in many ways, it's caused low prices in addition to the beneficial weather that we've had. But I think any company like ours, which is values-based and takes its commitment to the local communities very, very seriously, number one is respecting the resources, the human resources, but also the natural resources of those rural communities, and to recognize that you are oftentimes in countries or in rural communities, you are guests in their town. And you respect that fact, and you respect that fact by hiring labor, by giving back to the community through our philanthropy, by growing your business and reinvesting capital. Over half of our employees are in plant locations in rural communities around the world, and so we take that commitment very, very seriously. In Central America, we make poultry. I mentioned that a while ago. And we built with our money and our labor a school lunchroom for the local school where many of our employees send their kids to school. And the reason we did it is because in many of the poorer countries like Nicaragua in Central America, families depend on schools to get their meals. And the fact is, not all of those schools have a kitchen or have a place for their kids to get their meals where they can get a breakfast or a lunch. And so that's something that we have done in Central America. In Vietnam, where we are active in the animal nutrition and health business, we sell shrimp feed and poultry and swine feed to farmers. We are closing in on having built 100 schools in Vietnam, all in communities where we are selling feed to the farmers. The president of Vietnam once referred to us as the school company. And I was scheduled to go to Vietnam in December to celebrate the opening of the 100th school in our history or in recent past. I was there for the 75th. I went to the school and had the ribbon cutting ceremony and met the kids. But we do that with our contributions of labor and of time and of money. So we're coming up on 100 schools in Vietnam. But those are, I mean, I could tell you hour after hour of stories of how we've given back to the community, not just in financial terms, but in, I'll call it philosophical and cultural terms, and respecting the people that work for us there, respecting the environment, but also respecting the fact that we have a partnership and we are partners with those community members in those rural communities.
I find that story around the schools to be very consistent with something I mentioned earlier, right? Your passion for access to education for young people, you know, and it sounds like you're very nicely able to kind of marry the organization's mission and that passion. So that's a great story I was not aware of. Shifting gears a little bit, Kayla from Ohio has a question, and that is in regards to using intuition when making big decisions. Do you have a touchstone or test strategy for a decision you're about to make? And is there somebody or some group you bounce ideas off of or some other process to help you make sure you're making a sound decision?
I like that question. You know, I guess part of the art of leadership in part is how much do you use intuition? I mean, you can't make every decision, you can't make all your decisions on pure intuition, right? You've got to have the right mix of facts and quantitative analysis, but you can't wait until you have 100% of your analysis done. You know, you've got to get to, I'll say 70 to 80%. If you wait until you get every T crossed and every I dotted, you're going to miss a market opportunity, or it's going to be too late to make a decision. So I think, you know, I have a lot of friends with whom I consult. Tom, you're one of them. You know, I call it external board of directors. When I was deciding as to, you know, whether to accept this job, I had 4 people that I went and spoke to that have played roles in my life, in my career, and asked them for their advice. My wife is a strong advocate and a great giver of advice. So I think it's got to have a combination of people that are inside the company, people that you trust, people that are not necessarily direct reports, because that sometimes, you know, you've got to have somebody that isn't directly in your line of reporting, where you can ask their advice, and maybe they're a disinterested party, especially people that don't work in the company and don't have a dog in the fight, so to speak. So I think having the balance of friendships, professional relationships outside the company, and of course your professional relationships inside the company, but ultimately you've got to listen to your inner voice. And as I said, I think success oftentimes is having one that you listen to, but also having one that is good and that has served you well. I think oftentimes, I don't know if you remember this, Tom, but when I was at Piper, Gene Kranz came to speak to Piper, and he was, if you remember, the leader of the Apollo 13, the ill-fated Apollo 13 mission. It wasn't ill-fated. They got the astronauts back. But I vividly remember him saying that all the NASA experts told him to turn the lunar module, or the space capsule rather, around in mid-flight. And he said something inside him, his inner voice said, send it to the moon and use the gravitational pull of the moon to effectively torque it back to the Earth. And so all these smart engineers, he overrode their decision, and he was right. Now, I wouldn't be telling you that story, and he wouldn't have been telling that story, nor would he have written a book, nor would have been written a movie if he was wrong. But it's a good story, and one that I've always remembered, which is you've got to listen to your inner voice, and you've got to have it in the right mix of facts, quantitative analysis. And also, I've had leaders say to me, I keep my own counsel. I think that's a component of arrogance. I think if you think that you have the best decision or a monopoly on information to make that right decision, you're going to get in trouble.
Well, Dave, what comes to mind when you mentioned, I do remember Gene Kranz coming, is the verve. Because remember, just about every meeting we had started with that theme music.
So that's right.
So I've just planted an earworm for you and probably about half the audience. Shifting gears to another really important topic today, and that is the topic that was raised by something that happened in our own backyard here, George Floyd. It's a kind of whole, highlighting the need for racial equity. And we got a question here from Jillian in Illinois about does Cargill engage diverse suppliers and how? How is that done?
We have a director of supplier diversity. Her name's Natalie McGrady, and so she's in charge of ensuring that a growing amount of our spend with our suppliers is directed towards diverse companies. We have set targets for how much of our overall supply spend that we will have directed to diverse suppliers. So yes, it is a very important and measurable and measured component with discrete leadership to ensure that goal.
So another question which comes from Bill Miller, who was a fellow and is very, very passionate about it and working on the topic of human trafficking. And large global companies that have big supply chains, probably have to deal with questions like that in modern slavery. Just, I know it's not probably one of the most friendly questions, but an important question nonetheless. How does a company like a Cargill address those kinds of issues? And is there a role for a company like Cargill to address those kinds of issues?
I think there is. I think moral leadership in companies like Cargill is, as I said, at the core of our values. We've got our statement of work to protect and advance human rights is on our website. We have no tolerance, zero tolerance for human rights violations, whether it be human trafficking or child labor. We support the United Nations human rights efforts. We are very actively involved in the Sustainable Development Goals ambitions to promote dignified work around the world. And as I said, as you know, we're in a lot of different countries around the world. This is at the core of our values. We have enhanced our commitment to human rights over the last couple of years. In February of 2019, we enhanced our commitment on human rights. We detailed the principles that we embed into our policies and systems. And so it's a core part of our culture. And I think it's something that it goes without saying that we would never tolerate it. We have systems in place for people to let us know if there are violations going on, and we address and respond to it very quickly. And so it's an important question, but one I think more companies are spending more time on.
So we have once again, kind of on the values topic, a question from Terry in San Francisco. Terry was a fellow in our program, the inaugural cohort. And he says, what role does Cargill play in an ongoing way to support efforts around the world to combat hunger? And how important is it to the ethic of Cargill to take a leadership role in this important social issue?
Well, I think, as I said, it's at the core of our mission statement, is to provide food that's safe, affordable, and sustainably manufactured. It also means, as I told the story about the building the lunchroom at the school for our students in Nicaragua, it's building the schools where there are also lunchrooms in Vietnam. It's teaching farmers on how to be more sustainable, how to increase their yields. It's working in the local communities. We also have something called the Cargill Cocoa Promise, where we pay premiums to cocoa farmers in West Africa if they are following our principles for sustainable growth of cocoa, meaning use of water, use of fertilizer. And what they in turn have done with the premiums that we paid them is built schools, built nurses' office, created banks to allow them to become self-sustaining, if you will. So we're a food company, first and foremost, and our job is to get food to where it's needed, to where it's safely produced, and to where it's affordable. And as I mentioned, I've given several examples so far of it's just not about making food. It's also about training farmers, putting money back in the community, and doing the things that they need to help have access to food and nutrition.
So another element of large organizations, and this question is asked by Vicki in New Canaan, Connecticut, and that is they oftentimes have foundations that help them to advance things that are important. And maybe just a little bit about the Cargill Foundation and what role that plays.
Yeah, so we've got a Cargill Foundation. It's it's funded by the company, but therefore it's shareholder money. So for example, we just set up a COVID relief fund for our employees to apply if they've been particularly hard hit by COVID, whether it be funerals for employees or enhanced daycare, funerals for their relatives, I should say, relatives of employees. So we had that, and several of our family shareholders, also made contributions to that relief fund. Anytime that there are natural disasters in the communities where we're doing business, we activate the foundation and our own people to be able to help out with the recovery. We have a target of making contributions of 2% of our pre-tax profits on a rolling 3-year basis. So philanthropy and the existence of the Cargill Foundation is a very important part of our company. We have a standalone board of directors and includes some employees, but also some outside members to make sure that the funds are being distributed to the places where they're in greatest need. We do quite a bit here from the Cargill Foundation in Minneapolis, St. Paul. And also we allow our businesses to make direct contributions. So it's not, our philanthropy is not just coming from the Cargill Foundation.
So shifting to your people, a question comes from Mark in Minnesota. What are your human resource leaders saying is changing now regarding employee attraction and retention over the next 12 to 24 months, given the changes that are occurring, in particular with the pandemic as a backdrop?
I think it's an interesting question because, and I don't know the answer yet. So I don't know if does pandemic and people working remotely and working online, does it make switching costs lower or higher? Are people going to be more or less loyal to their companies for helping them get through the pandemic, or does it just make it easier for them to say, I'm going to try something different? Things like, we recently hired a position and the person was based in Texas. And I think typically we've said, you need to move to Minnesota. Well, moving to Minnesota right now from Texas is pretty difficult. And so we're allowing that person to work remotely. So I think that we'll see more incidents of people that are not going to move to our headquarters town, that they can do their job remotely. At the same time, we're committed to having a headquarters presence. We are a Minnesota-based company. We've got an office here. I don't think we'll ever see, I mentioned 2,000 people in the building that I'm sitting in. I don't think we'll ever see that again. I think you'll see people that are going to come in for a few days a week, some people that'll never come back in, some people that want to be here every day. I don't think I'll do 5-day work weeks if I'm not traveling. I can be effective and arguably more effective if I'm at home. Generally, I'm more productive if I'm in the office. Our Wi-Fi isn't that good, or the dog's barking, somebody's ringing the doorbell, those kind of things. I'm less distracted if I'm here personally. But I think there's a lot of people that can work very effectively and very productively from somewhere else. But it kind of links back to the question we were talking about on maintaining culture. How do you build a culture? I've got a daughter who is starting, today's her first day of work in Boston. She's got a full day of meetings. They're all online. But what is that going to be like for her to know what's the culture like? What is the informal network like? And, what are the cultural norms? And she's never going to get that on Zoom. And so how long will this last? And then do companies say, okay, we want you all back in the office? But I think this type of situation, the pandemic, has profound impacts on culture, on people's experiences, on their loyalty. I think in some ways being headquartered in Minneapolis used to be a competitive disadvantage. The old adage is tough to get people to move here, but very tough to get people to leave once they get established here. But maybe we don't need as many people in Minneapolis, but we are committed to having a headquarters and an in-person presence.
Yeah, and Dave, something I think about, which both of us, I think, had the great luxury of experiencing, which I don't think could have been done by Zoom, is the kind of relationship that we built with kind of a core group of individuals by being in person and kind of working through things, on 12, 14-hour days sometimes, and, have lunch or dinner or engaging with each other in the hallway. And I think in particular for the younger generation that is getting integrated when you usually do have the opportunity to be most social, that can be challenging. I think that's exactly right.
I agree. Or just getting to know somebody in the 5 minutes before a meeting starts. How's your family? What did you do this weekend? Where are you going on vacation, or how are things going? It builds, it's part of the culture and part of the personal connection. We are a company and a culture that has a lot of value and places a lot of value on that. And you just don't get it. You're on Zoom and, you got squares with 12 people on there, and you just miss that informal communication, going down to the lunchroom. How you doing? Haven't seen you for a while. Let's grab coffee sometime. It is a casualty of the pandemic, caused by the pandemic.
Yeah, I agree. Well, Dave, we're nearing the end of our time, and we call this Inspiring Conversations because we wanted to, unlike I think a lot of other conversations, at least that I've witnessed, hopefully draw out a little bit of the human and kind of personal side. And I really, really, truly appreciate you taking the time to share that and the kind of business challenges and other things that kind of make for an all-encompassing, purpose-driven servant leader like you are. So thank you so much for taking the time. I've had the great pleasure of knowing you for a long time, but I also learned a lot today, and hopefully our audience did as well. And so I don't know if you have any parting words, and I've got a couple of concluding remarks, and then we'll let you be on your way.
No, I'm flattered you'd consider to interview me, and I'm sorry I wasn't in person. As you know, we were scheduled to do that this fall, and hopefully next fall we'll be able to do it. But I appreciate, Tom, that you and the university created the Institute for Inspired Leadership, or this Inspired Leadership Initiative, Inspired Leadership Initiative. I mean, what a great opportunity for people to learn from each other and learn from others, and learn what's been good and what's been bad. So it's been an honor, and I really would love to come to campus next year if the occasion allows. So thanks for including me. I'm very flattered and honored that you choose to speak to me.
Well, thank you. We're the ones who should be flattered and honored to have your presence in the midst of everything that you're doing, some of which we got some great insights into today. And I also want to thank everybody in our audience, and I hope you found the discussion to be as insightful as I did. I thought it was really wonderful. And as a reminder, in 2 weeks, we'll have Muffet McGraw, actually. She's the former head women's basketball coach, and that's going to be hosted by someone who's far better at interviewing Muffet than I would be, and that's Chris Stevens, my partner in crime at the Inspired Leadership Initiative. And we'll be sharing part 3 on ThinkMD with a few short primer videos in the coming week. Please review and come prepared to discuss. And feel free to share the series with your friends. We'll accept registrations throughout the entire program as we learned today. Each meeting can stand alone. Thanks again, Dave. Really, really appreciate it. Thanks again to everybody. We'll see you soon.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, everybody. Have a great day.